another countries video, and yeah, maybe a little long one like yesterday, like Hungary and all that, but yeah, here we go. As the script is like 10 pages long, so yeah, let's get started with the history and all that. As what is now the Czech Republic was inhabited by a Celt race from around 400 BC, and the Romans called them the Boii and gave a name to Bohemia. And in about 100 AD, the Germanic people called the Macromani conquered the area, and the Romans traded with the Macromani and sometimes fought with them, but they never conquered it as such. And in the 6th century, Slavic people entered what is now the Czech Republic, and according to legend, a man called Czech led them. However, for centuries they were only a collection of tribes and not a single united people. But in the 9th century, a people called the Moravians, from the frontier of the Czech Republic and Slovak Empire, Slovakia, created the empire in Central Europe, and what was called the Great Moravian Empire, and included what is now the Czech Republic, Slovakia, parts of Germany and Poland. And German missionaries began converting people to Christianity, and by then the ruler Ratislav from 846 to 870 asked the Byzantine Emperor to send missionaries, and he sent St. Methodist and St. Cyril. So yeah, when Silas inherited the throne of Bohemia, now Czech Republic, in 921, when he was only 14, and he came of age, and he tried to convert his people to Christianity, but his people, led by his brother Boleslav, opposed him, and in 929, when Ceausescu was murdered, and afterwards he was canonized and declared a saint. Moreover, the march to Christianity could not be stopped as soon as all of Bohemia was converted into Christianity, and the Moravian Empire reached a peak under Savtopluk 871 to 897, but in 896 the first people called the Magyars invaded, ancestors of the Hungarians, the ancient Hungarians and all that, and they conquered Slovak, but Czechs remained independent during this time. Furthermore, was different tribes in what is now the Czech Republic gradually became united under the Premslid dynasty. However, the Germans overshadowed them, and in 950 the Bohemia became part of the Holy Roman Empire. And whereas the empire now is like the Christian writer Augustine claimed that the gods created the Roman Empire for the good of mankind, and he said there should be one empire led by an emperor, just as there was one church led by the Pope. In the early 9th century, a man named Charlemagne conquered most of what is Western Central Europe, and he claimed he was a successor to the old Roman emperors, even though his empire did not include Rome. And after his death, it split into 3 parts, and the eastern part eventually became Germany. However, the rulers of the eastern parts kept the title of emperor, and in this realm he became known as the Holy Roman Empire. And however, soon came a patchwork quilt of states that the emperor had little power, and the Czechs resisted any interference by the emperors in their domestic affairs. And in the 13th century Bohemia, the Czech Republic prospered. Alsace's silver and gold was discovered, and mining became an important industry, as German settlers, craftsmen, farmers and miners were encouraged to come to Bohemia as towns and trade flourished. And the Premslid dynasty ended in 1306 when Václav III was assassinated, and eventually the Czech nobles offered the throne to John of Luxembourg, the husband of Václav's sister, And in the 14th century, with the golden age of Czech, was a golden age for the Czechs, and John, who had ruled until 1346, spent most of his time abroad with his sons Charles of Carrel IV. Was a great ruler until under him Bohemia became rich and powerful. In 1355 he was elected Holy Roman Emperor. In 1356 he issued a golden bull which confirmed that the Holy Roman Empire was a commonwealth of sovereign states and not a single empire, as Charles included more efficient farming methods from France, and this area with its gold and silver mines made Bohemia prosperous, but Charles built many new buildings, and under him the arts kind of flourished. And furthermore, in 1348 Charles founded a university in Prague, and was the first in Central Europe. And by the late 14th century the church was very rich and powerful, and also had fallen into disrepute. The church had split and now two popes, both claiming to be the true pope. And some people began to demand reform, and in England, John Wycliffe criticised some of the church practices and beliefs, and his teaching spread to the Prague University, and leading reformers was Jan Hus. And at first the king was willing to support the Hussites for political reasons. However, Prague University was founded not just for Czech students from all over the Holy Roman Empire. They were also divided into 4 nations: Saxons, Bavarians, Poles and Czechs, and each had equal voting rights. However, in 1409 Václav IV changed the system, and he decreed that the Czech nation would have 3 votes and the other nations would have 1 each. In protest, German students and lecturers left, and yet Václav IV changed sides in 1412, and he was offered a percentage of the money from the sales of papal indulgences, as an indulgence was a document, and if you brought one, your sins were forgiven. And the Hussites disapproved of this practice, and they split with the king. And in 1412 Hus and his supporters were expelled from Prague University and excommunicated, and became wandering preachers. Eventually Hus was called to a central council of Constance to answer his charges of heresy. The Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund promised him safe conduct. Nevertheless, Hus was burnt to death in July 1415. And Czechs were poor, and afterwards many of their practices in Czech church was reformed, and citizens priests were removed from their parishes. However, in 1419 King Václav agreed to their reinstatement and provoked rebellion, and Hus's supporters threw their enemies out of the windows of the building, and the Pope preached a crusade against the heretics. However, the Czechs defeated them in battle, and under their leader Jędrzejka, they went out to meet the Crusaders, and the Hussites surrounded themselves with heavy wooden wagons for protection. And women fought alongside men and used farm tools as doubted into weapons, and using their unorthodox methods they crushed the Crusaders at the Battle of Witkov. Meanwhile, the Hussites had split into 2 groups, and the more radical wing found a new town called Tabor, and they became known as Taborites. And the Taborites did not only criticize the church, they attacked the wealth and privilege of it, and they not very surprisingly, they were unpopular with the upper class. And the more moderate wing of the Hussites wanted only religious, not social changes. And they were called Utraquists, and at first the Taborites and the Utraquists were forced to unite to fight the Catholics, and the Bohemian Diet, or Parliament, devised 40 Articles of Prague, which was meant to be a compromise, but the unity did not last long. And in 1431 Catholic Crusaders were crushed in a battle near Damascus, and after the Catholic Church realised it had to restore it to sort of diplomacy. And in 1433 they made peace with Utraquists, and the Taborites refused to stop fighting, and as a result the Utraquists turned against them. As wealthy Czechs feared the Taborites because they were opposed to the existing social order, and together the Utraquists and the Catholics crushed the Taborites at the Battle of Lipany in 1434, and afterwards the Church of Bohemia, Czech Republic, remained a moderate Hussite one. And in 15th century Bohemia, like the rest of Central Europe, was faced with a growing threat from Turkey, like Ottoman Turkey, and Bohemia had a succession of weak rulers, and the Czech nobility grew more powerful at the expense of a king and the towns. However, in 1526 the Habsburg became Ferdinand I, as the Habsburg were a powerful family who ruled several European states at the time, and the Habsburgs restored central rule. Something's telling me I got an email. But Ferdinand was a Catholic, and at first he was forced to accept the Hussite Church in Bohemia. But in 1546-47 he joined a war against Protestants in Germany, and many Czechs rebelled, but the rebellion failed. And afterwards many prominent Czech Protestants were executed, and furthermore Ferdinand invited the Jesuits to Bohemia and tried to convert the people to Catholicism. However, he had to tread carefully to avoid alienating his Czech subjects. And his son Rudolf II was even more tolerant, and privately said that he was neither Catholic nor Protestant, but Christian. And he was also a patron of the arts and learning. Under him, Czech culture had flourished, in 1611 he abdicated in favour of his brother Matthias. And in 1617 Matthias named his staunchly Catholic cousin Ferdinand as heir. And as a result of rebellion by Protestant nobles in other countries, both Catholic and Protestants took sides, and as a result Europe was plunged into the 30 Years' War. And it began in 1618 when rebels threw Catholic nobles out of a window in Prague, and the so-called Defenestration of Prague. However, the Czech Protestants were crushed in the Battle of Bielorussia, or White Mountain, in 1620. And after a number of Protestant nobles were executed and their property was confiscated in 1672, a new constitution was imposed, and the powers of a Czech Diet, or parliament, were curtailed, and Roman Catholicism became the only recognised religion. Meanwhile, the Czechs suffered terribly during the war, and in 1632 the Protestant Saxons took Bohemia, but the Catholic forces recaptured it soon after. And for 13 years, from 1635 to 1648, the two sides, Protestants and Catholics, fought over Bohemia. And when the war finally ended in 1648, Bohemia was devastated and the population was greatly reduced. And afterwards Bohemia was a predominantly Catholic state, and after the war Protestant landowners had their estates confiscated, and much of the confiscated land was given to Catholic Germans. And the Habsburgs ruler had much power and the Diet had little, and the Czechs became part of an empire including Austria and Hungary, and the Czech culture suffered a little bit. However, the Czech fortune revived in the Middle, as from 1714 Maria Theresa was Empress of Austro-Hungary, and she was sympathetic to the Czechs and previous rulers. However, Bohemia was involved in the War of the Austrian Succession from 1714 to 48, and French soldiers occupied Prague from 1741 to 42, and then by the Prussians in 1744. in 1757, the Prussians defeated the Austrians in the Battle at Prague. During the 7 Years' War from 1756 to 63. In 1773, the Empress banned the Jesuits, but in 1781, her successor introduced religious toleration. And in the early 19th century, Czech industry grew rapidly as the textile industry saw a boom, and the sugar industry and iron industry also had somewhat of a boom as well. And interest in Czech culture and history grew, and among the leading minds in the 19th century was Joseph Dobrovsky, from 1753 to 1829, a linguist, and František Palacký, who was a historian. And furthermore, during the 19th century, the great Czech composer Antonín Dvořák, 1841 to 1904, wrote operas, concertinos, and symphonies. As nationalism and the ideas of the French Revolution grew more and more during the 19th century, and in 1849 it exploded in a revolution, and it was ignited by a revolution in France in February, which was followed by the revolutions in other parts of Europe. Alarmed by the unrest sweeping Europe, the Austrian Emperor first backed down and promised his people constitutional changes, and in June a Slav Congress was held in Prague. And at the time, Czech radicals erected barricades in the streets of Prague. The army withdrew, but used artillery to bombard Prague, and the city surrendered, and the revolutions in the Austro-Hungarian Empire soon collapsed. However, in 1859, the Austrians were defeated in a war with France, and in 1866 the Austrians suffered another defeat in a war with Prussia. And following these humiliations, a dual monarchy was created in 1867, and Austria and Hungary became independent states with one monarch, but Czechs were not granted autonomy, and nationalism and demands for independence grew. But industrialization continued in what the Czech Republic was now the Czech Republic, and the coal mining boomed, so did the engineering industry, and the textiles industry continued to flourish, kind of thing. And in 1914, the Czechs were reluctant to fight for the Austrians and Magyars, and they were also reluctant to fight the Russians, who were fellow Slavs. On the Eastern Front, thousands surrendered to the Russians rather than fight them. And meanwhile, in Paris, a university lecturer called Thomas Masaryk formed an organisation called the Czech Committee Abroad, later changed its name to the Czech National Committee in November 1915. His organisation called for an independent Bohemian Slovakia, and on 29th June 1918 the committee was reorganised into a provisional government of what would become Czechoslovakia by France, and was recognised by Britain on the 9th of August, and by the United States of America on the 18th of September, and by Italy on the 3rd of October. By then the Austro-Hungarian Empire was collapsing, and on the 14th of October Masaryk gave US President Woodrow Wilson the Czechoslovak Declaration of Independence, later called the Washington Declaration, on the 28th of October 1918. An independent Czechoslovak Republic was declared in Prague. Meanwhile, in 1916, some Czech prisoners of war agreed to join the French Foreign Legion and fight the Austrians. And in 1917, a separate Czech army was formed in Russia. However, in November 1917, the communists staged a revolution, and Russia became embroiled in a civil war, and Czech soldiers were keen to return home. Whilst on 28th of May 1918, the communists demanded they disarm, but they refused and had to fight the Russian communists to get home. And then the new state of Czechoslovakia was the only industrialised state in Eastern Europe, and also proved to be the only successful democracy. And its first president was Masaryk, but he resigned in 1935. And during the interwar period, Czechoslovakia produced a great writer, a writer known as Franz Kafka, and other writers were Jaroslav Hasek and Karel Čapek, who first used the word robot for a mechanical man in his play RUM, Rossum's Universal Robots. However, the new republic was faced with problems that it contained large national minorities. On the 29th of October 1918, Germans in the north and west Bohemia declared their independence. However, the wartime allies were afraid that they would join with Austria. French and Italian troops were sent to the German areas, where they made a part of Czechoslovakia, but the German minority's desire for independence kind of continued to create problems. Meanwhile, in 1929, Czechoslovakia suffered from the economic depression, as did everywhere else. And by 1933, industrial output fell to only 60% of its pre-war levels, and unemployment soared till it was almost one-third of the workforce. However, in 1935, the Czech economy slowly started to recover. But in the late 1930s, the main question was that the Germans who lived in Sudeten lands formed a separatist party and the German Sudeten Party, and in 1935, 60% of the Germans who lived in the area voted for them. And after annexing Austria in March 1938, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia, as Konrad Henlein, head of the Sudeten German Party, demanded full autonomy. And in May, German soldiers began moving their troops towards the frontier, and the Czech government ordered a partial mobilization, as Henlein now demanded that the Sudetenland be joined with Germany. When Britain and France were all unwilling to fight for Czechoslovakia, and on the 15th of September, Chamberlain, the then British Prime Minister, met with Hitler at the Berchtesgaden, and he met Hitler in Bad Godesberg in an attempt to appease him, and on the 23rd of September, the Czech's army fully mobilised, but unfortunately on the 13th of September, Chamberlain and French Prime Minister met Hitler at Munich and agreed to all his demands. And the Czechs had no option but to agree, as President Beneš resigned on the 5th of October and he left Czechoslovakia on the 22nd of October. And on the 15th of March, Germans occupied the rest of the Czech lands, and Slovakia became a separate country, or a German satellite, that we kind of mentioned yesterday. And on the 21st of July 1940, the British government recognised Beneš as leader of the provisional Czechoslovakian government in exile. And in 1941, Reinhard Heydrich was made Reich's protector or ruler over Czech lands, and a wave of executions followed as Heydrich also began deporting Jews to concentration camps. But on May 27th, 1942, Heydrich was assassinated by Czech agents who had parachuted into the country, and the Germans carried out a terrible revenge as they burned the villages of Badis and Lezaki and killed the men and deported the women and children. And on the 6th of October 1944, Czech soldiers fighting alongside the Russian army crossed the border from Poland into Czechoslovakia. On the 4th of April 1945, President Beneš formed a provisional government at peace, and was made up of socialist Democrats and communists. And finally, on the 5th of May, the people of Prague rose in revolt, and they fought the Germans until 9th of May, when the Russian army arrived in the city. And after the Second World War, Germans from the Sudetenland were expelled from Czechoslovakia. And after the war, the communists began taking over Czechoslovakia, and although Beneš was president at the time, the communists held key posts of Prime Minister, Minister of Defence, Minister of Interior, and he also controlled the trade unions. And in the May 46 elections, the Communists obtained 40% of the vote and emerged as the largest party. And at the beginning of 1948, the Communist Minister of the Interior began a purge of the police of unreliable officers and replaced them with communists. And in February 1948, the non-communist members of the cabinet resigned in protest, hoping President Beneš would dismiss the communist Prime Minister, Clement Gottwald, but the communists held mass demonstrations and the Russian army began to build along the Hungarian border, and the Prime Minister Gottwald then demanded that President Beneš appointed a new cabinet of communists, which he did, and on the 9th of May Parliament passed a new constitution giving the Communist Party a leading role. As Beneš refused to sign it and resigned, as Gottwald replaced him as president. Meanwhile, a Liberal politician named Jan Masaryk was murdered, and the communists lost no time in creating a totalitarian regime in Czechoslovakia. And industry was nationalised, and in the 1950s agriculture was collectivised. At first, communists arrested their opponents, but they soon turned on their own, and in the early 1950s the Communist Party was purged, as many members were executed or imprisoned. And after the death of Stalin, Czechoslovakia was hit by demonstrations and strikes, and the army was sent in to suppress them, as Czechoslovakia remained a Stalinist society. But in the 1960s, a slight thaw happened and censorship was relaxed, and restrictions of foreign travel were made less rigorous. As a result, criticism of a new regime grew, and it reached a crescendo in 1968. In January 1968, Slovak named Alexander Dubček became first Secretary of the Communist Party, and during the so-called Prague Spring of '68, he introduced a more liberal regime. It was sometimes called socialism with a human face, and the censorship ended and people openly criticised the Communist Party. But the Russians were appalled, and they determined to end the liberalisation. And in the nights of the 20th and 21st of August 1968, Russian forces, and those from the Warsaw Pact, invaded Czechoslovakia and the Prague. Hello? Yeah? What is it? Okay. Go and take a picture of it. Oh, yeah. Okay. Bye. Sorry about that. Mum forgot her thingy, and And it's like after the Warsaw Pact countries and Russia invaded Czechoslovakia, Prague Spring was at an end and a long period of repression followed. And on the 16th of January 1969, student called Jan Palak, 1948 to 1969, poured himself in petrol and set it alight in Wenceslas Square in Prague, and he died in hospital on the 19th of January 1969. Despite his and other brave protests, repression still continued. However, demand for the human rights in Czechoslovakia would not die. And in 1977, a group of people formed Charter 77 or Charter 77 in protest about human rights abuses. Meanwhile, in 1969, Czechoslovakia became the first country in the world to make wearing seatbelts compulsory. And in 1978, Vladimir Remek became the first Czech in space. And nothing like throwing in extra bit of facts and all that. And in 1989, a communist tyranny in Czechoslovakia started to crumble, and on the 17th of November the police attacked the student demonstration and events moved quickly. And on the 19th of November, human rights activists formed in the Civic Forum. And on the 20th of November, huge demonstrations were held, and many more followed in the next few days. And on the 24th of November, the government resigned, but the demonstrations continued. And on the November, a two-hour strike was held. And eventually, a Communist Party agreed to end the one-party rule. But they also promised to form a coalition government. However, on the 3rd of December, it turned out the Communists dominated the coalition, and people were not satisfied, and they were held demonstrations. Finally, on the 10th of December, a new government was formed, and this time the Communists were in minority, as the Federal Assembly elected Václav Havel as President of Czechoslovakia on the 29th of December. In June 1990, multi-party elections were held in process of turning Czechoslovakia into a market economy began. And the Velvet Revolution was followed by the Velvet Divorce, as the Czechs and Slovaks were two different people with different history. As in 1992, the movement for a democratic Slovakia won elections and pressed for Slovak independence. As the Czechs and Slovaks reached an agreement, and on the 1st of January 1993, Czechoslovakia separated into Slovakia and Czech Republic. And the first president of the Czech Republic was Václav Havel, and in 2003 he was replaced by Václav Klaus, and today the Czech Republic is now a prosperous industrial nation. And in 1999 the Czech Republic joined NATO, and 5 years later in 2004 joined the EU. And like the rest of Europe, the Czech Republic suffered during the repression of 2009. But they soon recovered and like a more prosperous country today, as is noted, and the Czech Republic is noted for making machines, paper, glass, steel and ceramics, but it's also known for beer. And in 2016, Czechia became the official alternative name for the country, and the population stands at around 10.6 million people. And yeah, moving on to language quickly. The Czech is the official language spoken in the Czech Republic and is the dominant language of the country. And the total number of Czech speakers in the Czech Republic is to be over 10.7 million people, roughly. And as of data from 2012 Eurobarometer survey showed that 98% of the citizens of the Czech Republic were defined as Czech. As Czech is also recognised as the one of the official languages of the EU. Another languages spoken in the country include Slovak and Polish, which are spoken by small percentages of the population. Now, the origin of the Czech language can be traced back to the 9th and 10th centuries, when Czech and Slovak branched from the West Slavic language group, and during this period through to the 20th century. The Czech language was known as the Bohemian language, and as and the earliest records written in Czech appeared in the 13th and 14th century. So, as a statement in the 13th century, Letter Maurice Charter is the oldest known complete sentence written in the language, and the 14th century was a period when the language known as was further developed, and also was a period when the Bible was first translated completely to Czech, and the first attempt at the standardization of a Czech orthography was made during the Bohemian Reformation of the 15th century, and modern standard Czech language emerged in the late 18th century and early 19th century as the country was undergoing Czech national revival. And the standardization was primarily based on publication by Joseph Dobrovsky, a 19th century linguist. There's like varieties of the Czech language, as the Czech language is classified as an Indo-European language family and a member of the Czech-Slovak language group, and is closely related to the Slovak language. And there are three main varieties of the Czech language used in the Czech Republic, which are geographically defined. Each of the three varieties has a distinct characterization, and which set them apart particularly in their phonology and morphology, as these commonly include Common Czech, Bohemian dialects, and Moravian dialects. And Common Czech is a variety with the highest number of native speakers, who are predominantly found in the Czech Republic's capital city of Prague. And the Common Czech is widely used in print and electronic media, but the variety is yet to be codified. The Moravian dialect is another distinct variety of the Czech language, and the variety is prominently used in Czech Silesia and Moravia regions, and is estimated to have about 180,000 users in all over the Czech Republic. And the Moravian variety is made up of two dialects. Sorry for mispronouncing any of this. Silesian and Bohemian Moravian, and each Eastern and Central Moravian dialects, and the other variant is the Bohemian dialects, which are comprised of three dialects: Central Bohemian, Southwestern Bohemian, and Northeastern Bohemian dialects. In recent years, the use of Bohemian variant language in the Czech Republic has drastically declined, caused by usage of caused by public stigmatization, because the Bohemian dialects are now linked to a lower class of Czechs. So among the minority languages spoken in Czech Republic is Slovak and Polish. And Slovak and Polish are closely related to the Czech language, as the three languages are from the West Slavic group. And Slovak is spoken as the first language of a small population of Slovak people in the country, and the Polish dialects are spoken in the country of the Gorals people, who inhabit the mountainous region of the Czech-Poland border. So yeah, that's the languages, but let's just go on to myths and legends of Prague, as there's streets paved with cobblestones and long shadows stretching from glowing lanterns, and the wind playing with leaves and colourful leaves, and Gothic cathedrals. In some ways, Prague is magical, and as a city has many myths and legends from thousands of years of history. So yeah, the first is the brave horse and bet between saint and the devil, and there's a legend linked to the ancient Czech princes Vysehard have been told for many centuries. According to one of them, it was here that the execution of Harimir, who burned several settlements to get his revenge on the king, and he was responsible for taking many lives, and was supposed to have taken place. However, the cunning Harimir's last wish was to ride his faithful horse Simic, and the horse did not hesitate with one huge leap and jumped over the high rampart of Vysehard, and saving his master. And then there's a place with a fiendish atmosphere, is one of the best known Prague legends is one about the forest, he made a pact with the devil, and in exchange for all knowledge and pleasure of the world, for a period of 24 years, Thor sold his soul to the devil. And when the time was up, the devil took Thor straight through the roof. And this very day, the legend has it that the hole in the roof in Thor's home in Newtown was visible years after. And nowadays you can see the alchemist symbols on the wall and frescoes depicting for example, the mythical phoenix and the solar system. Then there's no fire like fire. When you're walking through romantic parts of Petrin, you probably might not believe that it was a sacrificial altar once stood there, and which a pagan priest burned beautiful virgins in sacrifice, like young virgins in sacrifice to the pagan gods, and during the reign of Prince Boleslav, the altar was destroyed and Church of St. Lawrence, which still stands today, built there. And the legends tell us that to this very day the pagan gods will appear here in the form of mysterious fires. Fires that allegedly have magical power and have even been able to cure rheumatism. And set out in search of Naiswork, and then there's treasure. Naiswork and set out in search of huge treasures, which is hidden by the most beautiful of Prague Baroque cathedrals, and the key is hidden in the picture of the death of Saint Xavier in the Cathedral of St. Nicholas of the Lesser Quarter, also known as a Lesser Town. And if you look at the picture carefully, you may be able to make much more than just loving memories away with you from Prague and all that. Surely, and everyone knows about the famous Bibliography. And legend tells that no one of the world's most important astronomers died of a burst bladder when etiquette forbade him to get up from the table before the emperor. And one thing is certain, you can see his Truman Turn Church in the old town square. And one thing I wanted to mention was Don Julius to Austria, and he was a bit of a cuckoo back then. In terms of these days, he might have been suffering from schizophrenia and all. And at the end of the 16th century, Český Krumlov Castle was influenced by the government of the last Rosenberg, Peter Wack van Rosenberg, and because of his marriage to Katerina of Denise didn't bring him a child, and his financial problems were no less than minor, he was forced to consider his own future. Finally decided to sell the family residence to Rudolf II on the 26th of October 1901, and the last Rosenberg left the Český Krumlov residence, which for 300 years had been the seat of the Rosenbergs. And just before Easter on the 3rd of 1602, without celebration, Český Krumlov Castle once again had a residence from a powerful aristocratic family, so it became an important manor. And in 1605, Newcastle's history was to arrive when the castle became home to the new seat of Don Julius of Austria, the illegitimate son of Emperor Rudolf II. And now his full name was Julius Caesar d'Austria. And he was likely born in either 1584 or 1586, as the eldest illegitimate child of Emperor Rudolf II. And his long-term partner, Katerina Stradova, as Emperor Rudolf, and Katerina had about 6 children together, and Rudolf II put his whole trust and hope in his eldest son Julius and helped him get good education, as well as trying to find him a good position. And Rudolf finally chose Český Krumlov as the residence for him. In 1605, Don Julius came first time to Krumlov from Vienna, and in summer of 1606, Rudolf sent him a courtier in gaming in North Austria, and in the autumn of 1607, Don Julius left gaming for Krumlov. and he lived until his death on 25th June 1609. And in 1607, Don Julius came close to someone called Markita Pislarova, and honoured the daughter of a local barber, Sigmund Pichler, and his wife Lucy Pislarova. And Don Julius invited Markita to live with him, had the permission of her parents, but after some time he became angry at her and beat her, cut her several times with a knife, and he thought he had killed her, he threw her from a window onto the rocks, and eventually noted by the Rosenberg chronicler Vaclav Razin, she was not so terribly damaged that she was no longer a single piece of body. In this condition she was thrown by him to the rocks, but it wasn't meant to be her last hour, because she fell onto the rubbish heap which saved her life. Once she was healthy again, she hid herself from him, but he kept returning to her mother, so Markita had to go to him again. And when Markita became healthy again, Don Julius asked her father to give Markita back, but he refused to do so, fearing for her life, as Don Julius put him into prison and threatened to kill him if Markita wouldn't come. And after 5 weeks in prison, Markita's mother agreed to bring her daughter and brought her to the castle on Sunday. The next day, on Monday the 18th of February 1608, Don Julius was in a fit of anger, ruthlessly killed Markita and disfigured her dead body in a tragic event was recorded by Vaclav Razin. Again, and on the 18th, he said, on the 18th of February, Julius, that awful tyrant and devil, bastard of the emperor, did an incredibly terrible thing to his bed partner, the daughter of a barber, when he cut off her head and other parts of her body, and people had to put her in a coffin in single pieces. And the gruesome events evokes and shocks a wave of anger in European aristocratic society, and that the advantage of being the emperor's son no longer applied. Even though the Emperor Rudolf II had no excuses for his son's behaviour, he even wrote himself about putting Don Julius into prison forever. And after murdering Markita, Julius's schizophrenia became more serious, as he refused to wash, shave or change clothes, and also refused food, as he kept throwing things around and was throwing things out of windows, as you do. And he never went outside, and towards the end of his life he lived in incredible filth and rubbish, and he slept only on carpets when he felt he could cover himself in what was once used to be his clothes. And the servants were so scared of him that no one ever entered his rooms, also because of the bad smell. And his health became so serious on the 22nd of June 1609, and not long afterwards, on the 25th of June 1609, he died, and the cause of death was said to be suffocation, after his ulcers ruptured and went into his throat. As Julius' death by Vladimir Brezin was also reported in a statement on front like this. On the 25th of June, during the night, Julius, that bastard, the illegitimate son of Emperor Rudolf II, being imprisoned in the castle under Pelican's rooms, fell down and sent his dangerous soul to the devil. And a statement about the funeral soon came, that Don Julius was buried in the Mennonite monastery in Sesky Krumlov, and was meant to be later moved to a grave befitting the son of an emperor, but Rudolf II died before it could happen, and the grave was added to the wall and hasn't been found even today. And it's when I first found it reading kind of like a novelisation of it, and kind of did the research behind it, and yeah, and it's I just thought it was interesting all to add on. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there, and I'll see you all tomorrow. So yeah, au revoir for now.